Think of the way a person adjusts the temperature of a room, nudging it warmer when it gets too cold, cooling it when it gets too warm, always keeping it within a narrow band that feels safe to them. That is what the avoidant was doing with the distance between you and you were the room they were regulating. When you drifted too far and they felt the chill of possibly losing you, they warmed things up, reached a little, offered a crumb of closeness to draw you back. When you got too near and the heat of real intimacy began to threaten them, they cooled things down, withdrew, went quiet, restored the distance that let them breathe. Back and forth, warmer and cooler, never too close and never quite gone, and the whole system worked beautifully for one simple reason: you let yourself be adjusted. And then one day, you stopped responding to the dial, and the person who had spent the entire relationship controlling the temperature suddenly discovered that the controls were connected to nothing. This is the quiet devastation of your silence, and it is worth understanding in exactly these terms, because it explains why your going quiet reaches an avoidant in a way that no argument, no ultimatum, no display of hurt ever could. Those things were all still inputs to the system. Your anger was a temperature they could adjust. Your tears were a signal they could respond to. Your pleading, your protesting, your reaching for a conversation, all of it was information the avoidant could use to recalibrate the distance and keep the room within the band that felt safe. But your silence gives them nothing to adjust. It is not a temperature. It is the power going out. And a person who has organized their entire relational life around the ability to regulate closeness does not know how to exist in a room whose thermostat has stopped responding to their hand. You may never have realized that this was the actual structure of what you were in, because from the inside, it did not feel like being regulated. It felt like loving someone who was hard to reach, someone whose warmth came and went for reasons you could never quite pin down. But step back and look at the shape of it, and the pattern becomes unmistakable. Every time you got close enough to matter, something happened to create distance. Every time you got far enough to leave, something happened to pull you back. The distance between you was never allowed to settle. Never allowed to become either the true closeness you wanted or the clean ending that would have freed you. It was kept, deliberately, though not always consciously, in a permanent middle zone, close enough to keep you and far enough to keep them safe. You were not in a relationship that was struggling to get closer. You were in a system designed to prevent closeness from ever arriving and to prevent you from ever leaving at the same time. Let us be clear about why an avoidant runs this pattern, because understanding the why dissolves the shame you may still carry about having been caught in it. The avoidant is not a villain rubbing their hands together, plotting to keep you miserable. They are a person for whom genuine closeness registers as danger, as a threat to the independence their sense of safety depends on, and for whom complete abandonment also registers as danger, as a loss they cannot bear. Caught between two fears, the fear of being engulfed and the fear of being alone, they do the only thing that lets them manage both. They keep you at a regulated distance, close enough to soothe the fear of loss and far enough to soothe the fear of engulfment. The push and pull that felt so personal, so much like a verdict on you, was really their nervous system oscillating between its two terrors, using you and your reliable responses as the mechanism for keeping itself in balance. It is worth understanding why your silence disarms them so much more completely than your anger ever could, because you may be tempted in your hurt to reach for the louder response. And it is important to know why the quiet one is the only one that truly reaches them. Anger is an input the avoidant knows how to handle. A raised voice, an accusation, a demand for explanation. All of these are signals they can respond to, adjust to, manage, and often turn to their own advantage, because your anger gives them something to push against, a reason to withdraw that feels justified, a way to recast you as the unstable one, and themselves as the calm party who simply needed space. Your anger, in other words, feeds the very story their defenses want to tell. It confirms that closeness with you was too much, too volatile, too dangerous, and it lets them retreat with their self-image intact. Drama is not a threat to the avoidant. Drama is fuel. It is the currency the game runs on. But silence gives them none of that. There is no accusation to deflect, no volatility to point to, no reason to withdraw that they can pin on you. no story about your instability that the quiet will support. Your silence is calm, and its calmness is precisely what makes it unanswerable, because it denies them the villain they need you to be in order to feel justified. Faced with a quiet, settled, non-dramatic absence, the avoidant cannot construct the usual narrative that protects them from feeling the loss. They are left with nothing to react against, and nothing to react against means nothing to hide behind, and nothing to hide behind means the loss reaches them directly, unfiltered, without the buffer that drama would have provided. This is why the quiet is so much more powerful than the storm. The storm gives them cover. The quiet strips it away. And that is exactly why your silence is so catastrophic to the arrangement, because it removes the mechanism they were using to manage both fears at once. As long as you kept responding, they could pull you close whenever the fear of loss spiked and push you away whenever the fear of engulfment spiked, and your responsiveness meant the system always worked, the room always came back into the safe band. But your silence takes the mechanism out of their hands. Now, when the fear of loss spikes, there is no reliable way to pull you back, because you no longer respond to the pull. The tool they use to regulate their own anxiety has stopped working, and they are left alone with the very fear they built the entire game to keep at bay. You did not just leave. You took their most important instrument of self-regulation with you when you went. You should understand what this feels like from inside the avoidant, because it is not the smug indifference you might fear, and it is not the simple sadness of an ordinary breakup. It is closer to a kind of vertigo, for as long as they can remember, they have navigated relationships by managing distance, by keeping the controls in their hands, by ensuring that they were always the one who decided how close and how far. It gave them a sense of safety, of never being fully at anyone's mercy. And your silence strips that away in a single stroke. Suddenly they are not the one deciding the distance. You are, and you have decided on a distance they cannot change. And for the first time in the entire relationship, they are experiencing what it is like to be on the other side of the arrangement they always controlled, to be the one who wants and cannot summon, to be the one reaching for a dial that no longer turns. It is a profoundly destabilizing experience for a person whose whole strategy was built on never being in that position. There is something the avoidant is forced to confront in that vertigo that they have spent their whole life arranging never to face. And it is worth naming because it explains why your silence reaches a depth in them that nothing else could. What they are forced to confront is that they needed you, not in the diluted, manageable way they allowed themselves to feel while you were present and the controls were in their hands, but in the raw, undefended way that only becomes visible when the thing you relied upon is gone and cannot be summoned back. The whole architecture of avoidance exists precisely to keep this recognition at bay, to let them have connection without ever having to admit dependence on it, to keep them always feeling like the one who needs less. And your silence dismantles that in a single stroke, because a person who is reaching for a dial that will not turn is a person confronting, whether they can articulate it or not, the fact that they were far more dependent on you than their entire strategy allowed them to believe. That confrontation is the thing they built the whole game to avoid, and your silence delivers them to it with no exit. This is why the loss lands so much harder than an ordinary breakup would, and why it can take an avoidant so long to process, if they ever fully do. In an ordinary ending, both people knew the stakes, felt the weight, grieved openly. But the avoidant spent your entire relationship not letting themselves feel the full weight of what you were, keeping it dimmed, keeping it manageable, so that when the ending comes by way of your silence, they are hit not only with the loss itself, but with the sudden, delayed arrival of everything they refused to feel while they still had you. It all comes due at once, the unfelt significance and the unadmitted need and the unacknowledged love arriving together in the vertigo of the dead controls, and it is far more than they are prepared to hold, precisely because they spent so long refusing to hold any of it in real time. The bill for a lifetime of managed distance comes at the worst possible moment, when the person it is owed to is already gone. You are not responsible for that reckoning, and you must not let yourself be recruited into softening it, but you are allowed to understand it, because understanding it frees you from the fear that your silence meant nothing to them. It meant everything. It reached the exact place their defenses were built to protect. The very fact that your quiet could produce such vertigo in them is proof of how much you were, not the little the game let them show, but the great deal they spent the whole relationship refusing to feel. You were never the disposable one, the easily replaced one, the one who mattered less. You were the one important enough that an entire elaborate system had to be maintained to keep your importance manageable. And your silence is what finally broke that system and let the truth of your importance come flooding through. Too late for them to do anything with it but grieve. There is a reason the avoidant so often experiences your silence as a kind of power they cannot understand, and it is because it inverts the entire dynamic in a way they were completely unprepared for. Throughout the relationship, they were the less available one, the one who seemed to need less, the one who held the power that comes from caring less openly. That position felt secure to them. It was the position they always sought, and your silence flips it. Now you are the less available one. Now you are the one who seems to need nothing. Now you hold the power that comes from being unreachable, except that in your case it is not a strategy, which makes it far more powerful than their version ever was. Their unavailability was always a performance in service of managing fear. Your unavailability is real, the genuine article, the actual turning of your attention elsewhere. And genuine unavailability has a gravity that performed unavailability can never match, because it cannot be coaxed out of, cannot be reached by the moves that work on a performance. What tends to happen next is that the avoidant, feeling the controls go dead, starts to jiggle the dial harder, and you should be ready for this so it does not catch you off guard. When the gentle adjustments stop working, when the small reaches and the familiar warmth fail to bring the room back into the safe band, the avoidant escalates because the fear they were managing is now rising unchecked, and they are desperate to restore the mechanism that used to soothe it. So the reaching intensifies. The warmth they always rationed so carefully may suddenly be offered more freely. The vulnerability they never showed may appear. The words you spent the whole relationship longing to hear may finally arrive, and it can look, to a heart that waited so long for exactly this, like the miracle of the avoidant transformed, finally able to give what they always withheld, understand what is really happening. This is not transformation. It is a person cranking the dial harder because the room will not respond, an escalation of effort driven by the panic of a mechanism that has failed, not by any change in who they are. The intensity is the measure of their fear of losing you, not the measure of their capacity to keep you. The proof, as always, is in what triggers it. If the sudden warmth appeared only once your silence made you unreachable, if it scales up as your distance grows and would vanish the instant you returned and let yourself be regulated again, then it is the escalation of the game, not the arrival of a new person. A truly changed avoidant does not reach hardest at the moment of greatest threat. They change slowly, from the inside, in a way that has nothing to do with whether you are currently available to be pulled back. But the avoidant in the grip of a failed thermostat reaches in exact proportion to how unreachable you have become, and that proportionality is the tell. Their intensity is tracking your distance, which means it is about the distance, which means the moment you close the distance, the intensity has nothing left to feed on and dissolves back into the old rationing. You would have returned not to a changed person, but to a temporarily frightened one, and fright, once soothed by your return, gives way immediately to the pattern it interrupted. This is the trap folded inside the escalation, and it is worth seeing clearly so you are not caught by it. The escalation is engineered, without anyone engineering it, to exploit the very hope that kept you in the game. For as long as you were in it, some part of you believed that if you just held on, if you were just patient enough and good enough, the avoidant would one day become the person who could love you fully. And the escalation, arriving in your silence, performs that person. It shows you a preview of the closeness you always wanted, delivered in the voice of the one you wanted it from. At the precise moment, your resolve is most tender. It is almost impossibly seductive. But it is a preview that cannot become a feature, a warmth that exists only under the pressure of your absence and cannot survive your return, because the warmth was never a change in their capacity. It was their fear reaching for its lost instrument. Take away the fear by coming back, and you take away the warmth, and you are left exactly where you started, holding the same rationed closeness, except now more tired and with less of yourself intact. You have to hold, in that moment, to a truth that the escalation is designed to make you forget, which is that the version of them reaching for you now is not the version you would get if you returned. You would not get the reacher. You would get the regulator again, the one who adjusts the distance to keep themselves safe, the one whose warmth comes and goes according to their fear rather than your need. The reacher exists only in the gap, only in the space your silence created. And the moment you close the gap, the reacher disappears and the regulator returns. It is one of the cruelest features of the whole dynamic, that the person you most wanted them to be appears only when you are leaving and vanishes the instant you stay. Understanding this is what allows you to receive the escalation without being undone by it, to see the beautiful reaching for what it is, a temporary product of distance rather than a durable change of heart. Before we turn fully to your freedom, it is worth sitting for a moment with what the years of being regulated did to your sense of yourself, because naming it is part of undoing it. When your closeness to another person is perpetually adjusted, warmed and cooled at the discretion of their fear, you slowly lose your grip on a basic truth that steady love would have kept intact, which is that you are lovable in a constant way, not a conditional one. The game teaches the opposite lesson with every adjustment. It teaches you that warmth must be earned and can be revoked, that closeness is a reward for good behavior and a punishment can arrive without warning, that your worth is something that fluctuates according to another person's unreadable internal weather. And you absorb that lesson, not because you are weak, but because you are human, and humans learn from the patterns they are immersed in. Over time, you can come to feel that your very lovability is unstable, that it rises and falls, that you must be perpetually vigilant to keep it high enough to be worth someone's warmth. That lesson is a lie, and your silence is the beginning of unlearning it. The truth the game hid from you is that your worth was never conditional, never something that rose and fell with another person's willingness to draw close. It was steady the whole time, sitting underneath the fluctuating warmth like solid ground under changing weather. What varied was not your lovability, but their capacity to stay near it, and those are entirely different things. You did not become more worthy when they warmed towards you, or less worthy when they withdrew. You remained exactly as worthy throughout, while they oscillated according to a fear that had nothing to do with you. Reclaiming that steadiness, the felt sense that your worth does not move, is one of the deepest repairs your silence makes possible, because it takes the measure of your value out of the hands of a person who is never measuring it accurately, and returns it to where it always belonged, which is within you, constant and unconditional, and no longer for sale. And there is a specific relief that comes with this. The relief of stopping the exhausting work of trying to earn a steady warmth from a source that could only ever give an unsteady one. You spent so long trying to figure out the formula, to discover what you could do or be or say to make the warmth stay, to solve the puzzle of why the closeness kept slipping away. And the deepest relief of your silence is the discovery that there was never a formula, that no amount of getting it right on your end could have produced a steady warmth from a system built on instability, that your endless effort to earn consistency was doomed not because you were failing, but because consistency was not on offer. There is a strange grace in that. It means you can finally stop trying. You can lay down the exhausting project of earning what could not be earned, and in laying it down, discover how much of yourself you get back. Now here is the reframe that matters more than anything about their side of it, because it turns this from a story about disarming them into a story about freeing yourself. Your silence was never really a weapon aimed at their thermostat. It only looks that way from the outside. From the inside, your silence is the sound of you climbing out of a system that was using your responsiveness to regulate someone else's fear at the cost of your own peace. Think about what it actually did to you to be the room that another person kept adjusting. It meant your emotional temperature was never really your own. It was set by their needs, warmed when they needed you close, chilled when they needed you far. It meant you lived at the mercy of a dial you did not hold, in a climate you did not control, forever bracing for the next adjustment. That is an exhausting way to exist, and most people who live in it for long enough stop noticing the exhaustion because it becomes the baseline. Your silence is the moment you took the dial back, not to control them, to finally control the temperature of your own life. This distinction is the whole thing, and it is worth holding onto tightly because it determines whether your silence sets you free or quietly keeps you bound. If you hold your silence as a weapon against their thermostat, you are still, in a real sense, standing in the room, still watching to see whether your absence has thrown them into disarray, still measuring your success by the chaos on their side of the dial. And a silence held that way is a silence you will eventually break, the moment their reaction disappoints you or fails to appear, because a weapon needs a target and the target is still them. But a silence held as freedom needs nothing from them at all. It has already left the room. It is not waiting to see whether they panic, not checking whether the controls have gone dead on their end, not measuring the success of your departure by their distress. It is simply the natural stillness of a person who has walked out of a climate they never got to set and into a life whose temperature is finally entirely their own to choose. Let something land here for the part of you that spent so long being adjusted. You are not, and never were, a room to be regulated. You are not a thermostat for someone else's anxiety. You are a whole person with a right to a steady climate, to a warmth that does not come and go according to another's fear, to a closeness you can actually rely on rather than one that is rationed to keep you manageable. The fact that you are treated as a mechanism for someone else's emotional regulation says nothing about your worth and everything about the limits of the person doing the regulating. And your silence is the reclaiming of your personhood from that mechanical role, the insistence, made not in words, but in the simple fact of your absence, that you will no longer be the thing another person adjusts to keep themselves comfortable. You may wonder why it took you so long to feel the wrongness of it, and the answer is not that you were foolish, but that the regulation was subtle and its logic was self-concealing. When the warmth arrived, it felt like love, and you did not stop to ask why it had been withheld before. When the coldness arrived, it felt like something you had caused, and you set to work trying to fix it, rather than questioning the system that produced it. At every turn, the pattern offered you an explanation that kept your attention on your own supposed failures and away from the structure of the thing itself. You were not blind to the wrongness. You were kept busy, perpetually occupied with the puzzle of their moods, so that you never had a quiet moment to step back and see that the puzzle had no solution because it was not meant to be solved. It was meant to keep you playing.